Joining us now, Republican Vice Presidential nominee, Ohio Senator JD Vance. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me, Shannon. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, there's a lot of new polling out there, but let's start with the gender gap because there is a double-digit lead for the vice president among women in nearly all of the battleground states. Politico makes this observation. Rather than pick a running mate who appealed to suburban women in swing states, he chose JD Vance, who was engineered to appeal to that self-styled alpha male crowd. They suggest that you guys are banking on the bro vote to carry you across the finish line. Politico has this line, says they've given up on the idea that they can get women voters. Are you giving up on us?
No, not at all, Shannon. Of course, that's a completely ridiculous argument for Politico to make. I mean, look, I'm aware of the gender gap. I see the polling that everybody else does. I also think there's some evidence that we've made some progress in the last few weeks. And of course, we're still a few weeks from the actual game day here. And so we're going to keep on making our argument to women voters, to male voters, to everybody that Donald Trump is the candidate of peace and prosperity. I think two issues in particular where I just make my pitch directly to women voters, Shannon, is number one, on public safety. We have a lot of young Americans right now who are dying of fentanyl overdoses, fentanyl that was brought into our communities, of course, through Kamala Harris's open border. Don't we want to raise our children as moms and dads in communities that are safe enough for kids to make mistakes without that mistake being laced with fentanyl and taking their life? Of course, don't we want our communities to not have these criminal gangs like we see in Aurora, Colorado, running rampage in that city? I think that a lot of women voters, but frankly a lot of men voters too, care a lot about public safety, and clearly President Trump is the candidate of public safety. The final point I'd make, Shannon, is that inflation often hits young women and women harder than other groups. Of course, we know that in a lot of households, women do the grocery shopping. That's not true in my household, as a matter of fact, but we know that women sometimes are the ones who see the effects of these higher rents, higher grocery prices, higher electric and utility bills, because they're the ones who are often, administering things. And I think that we can do such a better job for women to make it possible for them to afford the basic necessities of life, especially single moms, because we know, Shannon, for single moms, they're the only ones often doing these things. They don't have a whole lot of help. They need their government to not be screwing things up so badly.
Well, listen, this administration is going to point to good numbers that they got on the economy this week. This was the headline the DNC sent out. Inflation drops to lowest level since pandemic under Biden-Harris leadership. Trump's plans would cause, quote, inflation bomb. They're touting the vice president's plans to cut taxes for the middle class, give a leg up to small businesses, help with child tax credits, which I know is one of the few things that you guys actually agree on, bring down the cost of home ownership. They have different ideas about how to do that. They say versus your plan, which is just to give tax cuts to your wealthy friends.
Well, Shannon, I think that's ridiculous in a few ways. So first of all, they're trying to accuse Donald Trump of doing something that he didn't do during the 4 years that he was in president. We have to remember that he delivered the fastest take-home pay increases in a generation. We had inflation at 1.5%. And yes, he did selectively use tariffs to bring American manufacturing back to the United States, to increase the wages of workers and to push back against communist China. But he did that while delivering low inflation. And so in some ways, Kamala Harris's entire argument, Shannon, is that Donald Trump is going to somehow do something radically different than what he did during his first 4 years in office. What President Trump is in fact saying is we need to build upon the success of his 4 years in office and frankly get away from the record of failure of Kamala Harris. 3.5 years in office, trillions and trillions of dollars of new spending. We have more American manufacturing workers that are struggling. We have a wide open southern border, and most importantly, whether it's single moms or single dads, we've got people who can't afford groceries and rent. That is not a record to hang your hat on, but that's the Kamala Harris record.
Well, let's talk about tariffs, because you mentioned that, and there are a lot of critics who say what you and President Trump are now talking about is something much broader than a targeted tariff. They say it's immediately going to add thousands of dollars of new costs for Americans every year. A couple of former members of Congress, a Republican and a Democrat, wrote a piece in The Hill this week warning about this. They say a major element of his economic plan is the imposition of high tariffs on imports, which would be much more likely to lead to a depression than anything that Harris is proposing. They walk through President Hoover's decision to improve broad tariffs after the October 29 crash in the markets, and they say it led to the same things they worry would happen now: higher cost of living for all Americans, a tougher time, higher tariffs on U.S. exports, and actually killing a lot of manufacturing jobs here in the U.S. So why not be more precision about it than what it sounds like President Trump is suggesting on the campaign trail?
Well, first of all, Shane, I think those representatives fundamentally misunderstand history. As President Trump says all the time, William McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt built the American industrial powerhouse that we have today using tariffs to ensure that American workers got a fair deal and foreign competitors weren't able to undercut the wages of our workers. We have to sort of back up and ask ourselves, well, what is a tariff? Because people accuse it of being something that it's not. Think about if you're a foreign competitor working in China using literal Chinese slave labor at $3 a day, an American middle-class worker is never going to be able to compete on cost alone. We can compete on quality with those foreign slave laborers in China. So if you're going to use slave labor in China, what a tariff says is that you're going to pay a fat penalty before bringing those products back into the United States. That's really the only way to ensure that America has a viable industrial base.
Why not do that in a more precise way, a more surgical way than what we've been hearing from the campaign trail? Does President Trump plan something that is more targeted, or is it as broad as we've been led to believe by his own statements?
Well, Shannon, I think that President Trump can do these things in a broad-based way while also being targeted at the nations and at the industries that America most needs. We have to remember, Shannon, that we followed the advice of those congressmen for 30 years in this country. China now has 32% of world manufacturing GDP. America has 18% of world manufacturing GDP. Unless we use the power that we have economically to bring back good manufacturing, we're going to wake up in a country 20, 30 years from now where everything that we need, the pharmaceuticals that we put into the bodies of our children, the weapons of war that our troops use, are made by foreign countries that don't like us very much. The only way to prevent that, and the only way to rebuild the prosperity we had 30 years ago, is to do what Donald Trump is proposing. One final point on this tariff issue, Shannon, is for 200 years, the American economic miracle was built by using tariffs when appropriate to ensure that American workers could thrive. We've gone the other direction for 30 years at the time that our middle class has been shrinking, inequality has been going up. We've tried the experiment of shipping our jobs to China and building prosperity off that. It's a failed experiment. We need to get back to the Trump approach of rebuilding the American middle class and the manufacturing sector that really is the foundation of that middle class.
Okay, I want to get to the Trump and Vance approach when it comes to abortion. Clearly, that's one of the issues that appears to be leading to this gender gap that you guys have a disadvantage with. Governor Walz, when he joined us last week, said here that you have supported a national abortion ban in the past. He may have been referring to this position you took in 2022. This is from your Senate debate then.
You would vote for Lindsey Graham's 15-week ban?
As I just said, I think it's totally reasonable to say you cannot abort a baby, especially for elective reasons, after 15 weeks of gestation. No civilized country allows it.
Okay, so not a federal ban per se on the procedure everywhere, but if you're talking about 15 or 20-week ban nationally, that is going to cut off access to a lot of people who have greater access in a number of different states now. You've talked about how this is back to the states. Has your position on that changed? Would you vote for something that was a 15, 20-week ban at the national level?
Well, Shannon, first of all, I do think it's reasonable to say at a certain level, late-term abortions are barbaric if they're done for elective reasons. Of course, you have to have the exceptions, but late-term abortions for elective reasons is something that no civilized country allows. And certainly there is a contrast here between Governor Walz and Kamala Harris. They want late-term abortions funded by taxpayers, forced on Christian hospitals, and that's not something that Donald Trump and I like.
Okay,
but even
when you
within
talk about a 15 or 20-week ban,
Shannon,
people will say that sounds like a national ban. I mean, we're just playing with semantics here.
No, it's not, Shannon, because, look, President Trump, who, of course, is the leader of the Republican Party, has explicitly said that he would not support a national abortion ban. He has said that he thinks this issue should be left to the states. That is the official policy of the Republican Party in this election, and it's something that clearly President Trump believes in. And I think it's important to say why, Shannon, because it illustrates how different our approaches are here. President Trump recognizes that California is a different state from Alabama, which is a different state from Pennsylvania. We want the voters in these states to make these decisions. We're sick of the nationalized culture war over this topic, and I think the best way is to return it to the voters in the states. President Trump has certainly made that the official policy of our party. And
quickly on Planned Parenthood, you guys have talked about defunding them, taking away government funding. They say that no U.S. taxpayer funding can flow to abortion at any stage, but they say they do hundreds of thousands of cancer screenings, birth control, which they say actually prevents another 500,000 abortions a year, and all kinds of other testing and medication, contraception. Where would those patients go if Planned Parenthood lost the funding?
Well, Shannon, what we've said is that we don't want taxpayer funding for abortions. And that, of course, has been the bipartisan approach over 40 years in this country until, frankly, Kamala Harris came along. I know that Planned Parenthood does a lot of things that a lot of young women, a lot of young families need. We're talking about we don't believe in taxpayer funding for abortions. That's been the policy, not just of the Republican Party, by the way, but even a lot of Democrats who are pro-choice, who want wide access to abortion will say, we don't think taxpayers should be funding this stuff. And that, again, that bipartisan consensus is something President Trump very much supports.
Okay, so maybe not a full defunding of Planned Parenthood per se, but anything that you would be able to potentially track, which they say doesn't happen, but to abortion. We have so many more questions. We hope you will come back soon, as Governor Walz is doing this week as well. Senator, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.